There's an elected official in Illinois who most voters probably couldn't name. No national profile, no cable news appearances, not a lot of campaign ads. But this person controls the checkbook for the 6th largest state in America. To hospitals, to schools, to nursing homes, to contractors. They go through this office, and right now, that office is open. You might be thinking, it's the state treasurer. They control the funds, right? Well, yes, they do, but they don't cut checks. They manage public funds and investments. But no, the person we're talking about is the state comptroller. And for the first time in a decade, Illinois is choosing a new one. The short answer, the comptroller is the state's chief fiscal control officer. According to the state constitution, this office maintains the state's central bank accounts, records every financial transaction, and authorizes every payment out of state funds. Think of it this way. The governor and the legislature decide how much to spend and where. The treasurer holds the money, but nothing gets paid until the comptroller signs off on it. That makes the comptroller, officially at least, the last set of eyes on every dollar that leaves the state government. The office is also in charge of the State Employees Retirement System Board, meaning the comptroller has a hand in managing the pension funds for hundreds of thousands of state workers. And beyond just writing checks, the comptroller issues financial reports on the state's overall fiscal health, publishing data that helps guide what the governor and the legislature do next. In theory, this is a nonpartisan job. Think of them like the state accountant. But in practice, it's one of the most important positions in the state government. So, to understand why this job matters, you need to understand what happened between 2015 and 2017. For 736 consecutive days, so about 2 full years, Illinois worked without a complete state budget. Then Republican Governor Bruce Rauner and former Democratic Speaker Mike Madigan were locked in a stalemate that the state simply stopped passing spending bills. During that time, Illinois' backlog of unpaid bills climbed to over $14 billion. Social service agencies stopped getting paid, hospitals waited months for reimbursements, and nursing homes were going up to a year without seeing a check from Springfield. Not to mention, the state was racking up $2 million a day in late payment interest penalties. That's under a law called the Prompt Payment Act, which charges 12% interest on bills that go over 90 days past due. This is the moment when the comptroller's role really took a step up. Susana Mendoza, who won the office in a special election in December 2016, spent her first year publicly calling out the Rauner administration for holding bills at state agencies to hide the true size of the backlog, fighting for debt transparency legislation, and pushing to refinance their interest debt to get a lower rate. That refinancing deal eventually happened, and by 2022, Illinois started a new fiscal year with its Medicaid bill backlog paid off for the first time in several years, ahead of schedule too. Good job, Illinois. But here's the thing about the finances. Clearing the debt is one problem. The pension crisis, that's another. So, as of 2025, Illinois has about $143 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. That's the debt owed to state employees, teachers, judges, and university workers whose retirement benefits the state has promised but doesn't have the money to pay. Illinois state pension systems are funded at around 50%. The average for a healthy pension fund is about 80%. At one point, Illinois ranked practically near the bottom in the nation for this, according to the DuPage Policy Journal. It's good to note that the comptroller doesn't create pension policy. That's the legislature's job. Regardless, the comptroller has to make sure that these legally mandated pensions get paid out on time every single month, even when there's no budget drawn up at all. That last part is so important. Under Illinois law, pension payments are constitutionally protected. The comptroller must make them regardless of what's going on in Springfield, which means when there's no budget, the comptroller has to decide who gets paid and in what order, while politicians fight things out. And in a state that's looking at a tighter budget in the future, that is a huge amount of power, especially for an office some voters might have never heard of. So now that we know a little bit about what the comptroller does and the context from the last decade, let's talk about what's going on right now, the 2026 election. Susana Mendoza, remember her? Well, She's held the office since that special election back in 2016, but she announced last summer she wouldn't seek a third full term. Some are saying she might run for mayor of Chicago in 2027. So without Mendoza, that makes the Comptroller one of 2 statewide seats without an incumbent in this election, the other being Senator Dick Durbin and the state's U.S. Senate seat. Right now, there are 4 Democrats and 1 Republican on the ballot for the March primary. So let's go through each of them. Margaret Croke is the candidate with the most political infrastructure behind her. TransparencyUSA.org says she's raised over $1 million for her campaign, which is a little less than what her 3 Democratic opponents have raised combined, with Governor J.B. Pritzker's campaign also donating $72,000 to her effort. Before being elected to the State House in 2020, Croke was Deputy Chief of Staff at the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. She's pitching herself as the modernization candidate, promising to upgrade the Comptroller's computing systems to make state spending fully transparent to the public in real time, and to revamp the vendor payment program to help businesses and nonprofits with potential federal funding cuts. Stephanie Kifowit has the longest legislative resume in this entire race. She's been in the General Assembly since 2013. She's also a U.S. Marine veteran and a former registered financial advisor, which she argues makes her uniquely qualified for a job that is, at its core, a financial management role. Kifowit is campaigning on creating a dedicated labor division inside the Comptroller's office. In theory, they would catch violations before taxpayer dollars go out the door. On the financial side, though, she's raised the lowest for a qualifying candidate at just about $384,000. Holly Kim is the only candidate in this race who is already running a Comptroller-style office. At least that's what a big part of her campaign is saying. As Lake County Treasurer, the state's 3rd largest county, Kim oversees an office that operates similarly to a Comptroller managing public dollars. She has the backing of outgoing Comptroller Susana Mendoza, who's passed on endorsing any legislative candidate in favor of Kim. Kim has highlighted fiscal transparency and prevailing wage enforcement and has spoken openly about her personal experience with financial hardship as a way of explaining her approach to the role. Meanwhile, Kim has raised just over $400,000 for her campaign thus far. Speaking of numbers, Kim's campaign has also been citing a poll showing her at around 45%, but that number needs context. A lot of context. First, the poll was paid for by Kim's own campaign, and the way it was structured matters. Respondents started with almost no opinion. 85% of them said they were unsure of who to vote for. Then, before being shown anything about Holly Kim, they were asked whether they'd prefer a candidate with, quote, financial experience, like a county treasurer, which is Kim's exact profile, or a lawmaker/legislature. 75% of people said they would prefer a candidate with a financial background. Afterwards, respondents were asked to rank each candidate based on how likely they would be to vote for them based off a provided biography. But in this section, things get a little weird. Voters were shown possibly 2 different biographies, one for the first 50% and then one for the other. This biography was vastly different from the other candidates. Kim's was more detailed, achievement-filled, and more descriptive, to say the least. Meanwhile, every other candidate only got one, shorter, no accomplishments listed. Then respondents were read statements about Holly Kim specifically. No other candidate got that treatment. After all that, the poll said Kim was favored by 45% of respondents. It's not a lie, but it's also not an accurate picture of where the race stands. Karina Villa is probably the most progressive candidate in this race. A state senator from the Chicago suburbs, she carries endorsements from prominent progressive voices, including U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, U.S. Representative Delia Ramirez, and Illinois Senate President Don Harmon. Villa has called for new revenue measures, including a digital advertising tax, and has criticized some of her opponents' donor bases, particularly Croke's Super PAC and Republican-affiliated contributions. She has framed the race around economic justice, arguing the Comptroller's office should be actively working to raise new revenue and fight on behalf of working families. She said the office can do more than just cut checks and could also push for legislative change in the state. In total, Villa has raised the second most amount of money at about $630,000. On the Republican side, Brian Drew, an attorney from Benton in Southern Illinois. Drew is running unopposed for his party's nomination. meaning he'd be facing the winner of the Democratic primary come November's general election. In a state where Democrats have dominated statewide offices for years, Drew faces an uphill battle, although not an impossible one, as Republican candidates have held this office before. So let's zoom out. Why does this race matter? Well, there's 3 reasons. Number 1, federal funding uncertainty. Look, it's no secret. The Trump administration has tried freezing or cutting billions of dollars in federal funding to Illinois for healthcare, education, and social services. The Comptroller is the office that has to manage the cash flow disruptions when that funding disappears or arrives late. Every candidate in this race has been asked how they'd handle it, but their answers all differ. Reason number 2, the pension cliff. According to IllinoisPolicy.org, the state still has around $200 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. And as we talked about before, the Comptroller doesn't set pension policy and has to keep making legally mandated payments even as the budget gets tighter and tighter. And then lastly, reason number 3, modernization. The Comptroller's technology infrastructure is, by multiple accounts, pretty outdated. Every candidate has promised to upgrade it, but there are real consequences if these upgrades have issues, like payment delays caused by system failures. This would affect vendors, schools, and social service agencies across the state. So the biggest question in this race isn't really what candidate has the best resume, it's who you're trusting to manage Illinois' checkbook in an era of fiscal uncertainty at both the state and federal level, without drama, without crisis, and without politics getting in the way of bills getting paid. The Illinois Comptroller is not a glamorous job by any means. They won't usually make national headlines, and you probably won't see someone doing an SNL impression of them anytime soon. But during times like that 2-year budget impasse, this was the office keeping the lights on for schools and nursing homes. During COVID, this office managed a $2 billion federal loan and paid it back 2 years early, saving taxpayers millions. Every state has a version of this role. Most voters don't even think about it until the check doesn't come in. And in Illinois, they've learned that lesson the hard way.